Salutations, my fellow family on the internet, or perhaps just above average acquaintances, or just acquaintances that are average. Persona! I've been reading this book called Clear Your Shit by Dane Thomas, and there's a concept I really like from it that I want to share that's been very useful for me as of recent. This book essentially is a book on how to clear your, let's say, your mental, emotional, spiritual blockages to help you be more you. And one technique that it employs is this I'm okay statements technique. Essentially, you say things like, I'm okay with one thing, but then you say I'm okay with the opposite of that thing. So for example, I would say something like, I'm okay with making this video, but I'm also okay with not making this video. I'm okay with speaking really coherently and expressively. I'm also okay with speaking not coherently and expressively. I'm okay with people understanding me. I'm okay with people misunderstanding me. So how I've been using this recently is anytime I suppose I feel a negative feeling, I would try and first and realize what I'm not okay with and find ways to kind of be okay with it. So for example, I'm always kind of afraid that maybe I'm not communicating as well, or I'm not fully expressing myself, or that I'm not coming across as like to my maximum potential. I can be like, okay, I'm okay with communicating fearlessly and expressively, but I'm also okay with not communicating fearlessly and expressively. It's like I'm okay with stumbling through my words and looking nervous or being awkward or being this and that. In the past, I've done this thing where it's like if a negative feeling comes up, it's like I would just bulldoze through it. You know, it's like I would just be like, no, I don't feel it. I feel really good. And it's almost like you're neglecting that part of you by trying to artificially amplify the opposite feeling. And sure, it could work, but it still feels like you have the handbrakes on your car, and instead of letting go of the handbrakes, you're just accelerating harder. And it's like, yeah, the car is moving, but it's also like kind of you're damaging the car. So with this technique, it's like being okay with the thing you don't want to be okay with. You're letting go of the handbrakes, and it's like you don't need to use so much excess energy to try and move yourself forward. You can just be free and be yourself. And in a way, it's like you're doing things out of play and expression rather than trying to hunt down a result that might actually just not be as an effective way of getting the result. It's like the less you hunt and the more you just play and just be fun and chill and light about it rather than desperate about it, the more likely you actually get the result. You know, it's again this whole power of the paradox thing. And of course, it's a lot easier said than done. It's like, because some things are really hard to be okay with. It's like, you know, it's like, oh, I'm okay with being rich. And I'm okay with not being rich. You know, that's not too bad, but it's like, I'm also okay with being in poverty. And it's like, whoa, I'm not okay with being in poverty. I'm not okay with being homeless. And it's like, these really hard things to be okay with. I find it usually reveals a part of you that you haven't fully delved into. Because I think if you really go down this rabbit hole of like why you're not okay with certain things, ultimately it ends up in death. And if you find a way, and again, I think this is not easy, but if you find a way to actually be okay with accepting death, then ultimately this technique becomes infinitely powerful, because it's like, I'm not okay with being poor because I'll be homeless. I'm not okay with being homeless because then it's like, you know, I won't have food. I think people might judge me. My friends, my families might think, oh, look at Tian. He used to be so cool, but now he's homeless. Like, what a loser. And it's like, whoa, I can't have that, because I feel like that's not okay, because I feel like my sense of self is attached to other people. Or this and that. It's like, ultimately, it's like, I'm afraid of dying. Once you're able to find peace with these things, it's so much easier to be okay with things not happening. There is a huge fear in me where I'm like, oh, I'm not okay with running out of money and then going back to my parents and being like, oh, hey, parents, can you support me? Because I'm like, no, I'm an adult, I should be able to support myself, and But it's like, ultimately, if you think about it, it's like, why am I so afraid of that? Maybe it's like, I'm afraid I've let myself down, I've not, you know, used up my full potential. And it's like, well, why are you so afraid of not using up your full potential? Like, why do you need to use up your full potential? Because like, oh, I feel like I need to. It's like a responsibility, I owe it to someone. It's like, if I don't do it, then that person is going to be mad at me and I'll be punished. But it's like, well, who do you owe it to? God? It's like, you don't know. It's like, you know, you go down this rabbit hole, and it's like, it gets to a point where it just feels like all your fears becomes kind of irrational and unnecessary, and it helps you to be okay with certain things. And it's like, once you're okay with certain things, it doesn't mean that you're gonna be homeless and you're gonna run out of money and you're gonna have all of these things happen. It's like, once you're okay with it, chances are you're gonna go completely opposite from that. Because it's like once you remove the fear from the thing, it's like you're no longer putting any energy into that reality, right? You're completely free to just do what you want. And it's like, if you're just free to do what you want and you're excited about your life and you're not living through a pathway of fear, well, your energy is going to go up, your vibration is going to go up, you're going to do a lot of cool things. And chances are when you do cool things, you'll be very attracted. Then you'll be pulled away from those things. And it's like the moment you start fearing those things and not being okay with it, that's when it actually starts pulling you away from that vibrational state, if you will. Persona! So with Dane Thomas in the book, like he uses kinesiology to kind of like figure out what you're saying is true. So it's like you do this thing with your fingers, and it's like if it's true, it's strong. If it's not true, it's weak. I haven't really gotten very good at it, or haven't really practiced with it, actually, to be honest. For me, I can just internally feel it. It's like if I'm trying to say I'm okay with something that I'm really not okay with, I would just feel like this huge feeling of collapse. Like my whole internal system is just this cavern. It's just like no, that's not okay. At that point, I kind of go like, okay, why is that not okay? Like, what am I not accepting? And sometimes that can be very hard to figure out. And journaling is a really good way to really figure out, like, okay, I'm not okay with this because da-da-da-da-da. Actually, I would really recommend, if you have a practice of journaling, to just be like, I'm not okay with this thing that I can't accept because da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And then you just go down this rabbit hole, and hopefully, if you're honest enough, you'll get to a point where you're like, oh, I'm really not okay because of this main reason. And it's like, actually, this main reason is really irrational, it's ridiculous, it probably will never happen, therefore there isn't really anything for me to fear. Then you're more likely to be okay and being okay with it. Then you can let it go. And I like to use this metaphor of, like, for example, imagine you have a pool. It's an analogy, actually. So, and there's something in your pool, at the bottom of the pool, that you don't want there, and it's trying to float up into the surface, right? And ideally, you just let it float up, so when it gets to the surface, you can just take it out, right? But what we tend to do is, when these things start floating up, and these things are our fears and things we don't want to deal with, instead of letting it float up and like seeing it for what it is and just kind of like letting it go, we push it down with, we're in the pool, like pushing down this thing that's trying so hard to get back up. We're using so much energy because we're so afraid to deal with it. We just end up blocking ourselves, essentially. And we may spend years suppressing certain things that are trying to float up, only to have some sort of the straw breaks the camel moment where finally like shoots up and you have no more energy, you have no more power left to push it down, and it goes up and you have this like perhaps crazy traumatic event where you release it, and it's like, well, yes, that's one way. It's like eventually, don't worry, you will release it one way or another, if not in this lifetime, maybe the next. But it's like, why don't you just do it in this lifetime, instead of suffering through this entire lifetime only to get that out, before your deathbed. In the book, Dane talks about how don't clear too many things in one day, because and it's very true, because it's like there are some things I try to clear, and I would clear one thing, I'll be like, oh my god, woo, oh, that's such a weight off my shoulder, right? And then as I try to do another one, and it's like, it gets to a point where like it uses a lot of mental strain to really clear these things. So it's like your brain is wired in a certain way, and now you're just essentially rewiring in a different way, and it's like douche, 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 and your brain's like, oh fuck, like, okay, yeah, shit, just give me a moment. So don't do too many clears in one day, or just do as many as you want until it gets to a point where it's just too difficult. Is what I would say. And I mean, there's also a fear that I'm afraid that if I post this up and Dane sees it and he's like, oh, this guy, he doesn't know what he's talking about. He's completely bastardizing my book, and this is all shit. And I'm like, oh my god, I'm so afraid to say these things because I'm afraid I'm completely not representing what he wants to speak. Because I know maybe some writers are very picky about like, oh, these guys, they don't understand me. They're just kind of like isolating one thing and talking about, and not really appreciating it. But I'm like, fuck. I'm really afraid of that, and I'm really afraid of making this video in case that happens. But I'm like, well, I'm okay with this video being received really well. I'm also okay with this video being received not really well. Ultimately what's important, I think, is not whether or not I can take the image to my, the hit to my self-image or my ego. But what's more important is that I get this message out there because I feel like it's really important. Persona! So to end this video with, I want to give you a few examples listed in the book that I found really resonated with me, with statements that I think most people have issues with being okay and not okay with. I'm okay with being selfish. I'm okay with not being selfish. I'm okay with being evil. I'm okay with not being evil. Because remember, you might be like, well, I'm not, how can I be okay with being evil? It's like, again, it's the whole pushing things down in a pool analogy. The more you condemn something, the more energy you actually feed into it. The more you accept it, the more it's actually likely to not harm you. And some of these will be insanely hard to clear. I think, even when I say like I'm okay with being evil, it's taking me a very long time to actually be okay with that. Because chances are, the more you condemn about not being evil, there's a higher likelihood of you actually becoming evil. I'm okay with selling, I'm okay with not selling, I'm okay with being an employee, I'm okay with not being an employee. I'm okay with having a job, I'm okay with not having a job. I'm okay with loving myself, I'm okay with not loving myself. Because sometimes it's like you're gonna go through times in your life where you really feel shit about yourself, and maybe you don't love yourself, and a part of you might be like, no, it's not okay to not love yourself because these people that are all about peace and light, it's like, you have to love yourself, you can never not love yourself. And it's like, no, you have to accept both sides of the coin. Like, it's not just light, it's light and darkness. It's not just Christ, it's Christ and Antichrist, angel and devil. And it's like, you have to accept both sides of the coin in order for you to really become, I suppose, complete and actually move away from it. It's like if you only do one side and you're afraid of the other side, you're actually not able to fully embrace the side that you are okay with. Like, I'm okay with being in love, I'm okay with not being in love. I'm okay with being abandoned, I'm okay with not being abandoned. I'm okay with being a slut, I'm okay with not being a slut. It's okay to be a slut if you are a slut. Look, if you're truthfully being a slut and you're wanting to have that experience, that's okay. And it's like, to anyone that shames you for it, it's like, I'm okay with them shaming me for it. I'm okay with them not shaming me for it. I'm okay with feeling ashamed. I'm okay with not feeling ashamed, right? It's like everything can be accepted and dealt with. And it's like the moment you dive into acceptance is the moment you find peace. I'm okay with being okay. I'm okay with not being okay. So, I hope that was helpful, because I know it's a concept that's really helped me, and I hope I explained it clearly to you. But essentially, the main takeaway, the practical takeaway from this video is, anytime you feel like you have an emotional reaction to something, try your best to first and foremost find out what that fear is, and try your best to be okay with it, because ultimately, at the end of the day, you're gonna be okay. Everything is fine. Like, it can't not be fine. And it's like, not being fine is also fine. Like, everything is fine, right? And I do believe if everyone is able to live in a state closer to that, well, I think we'll just have a better world to live in. Everyone will just be happier, and it will just be more fun. And there'll be less bullshit, everything will just work. It'll be more coherent and smooth and sexy and stuff like that. So, to this day, my dear friends on the internet, my acquaintances, friends, or family, what have you, I wish you to be okay with being okay and not being okay.